Thanks, Chris. I just want to echo what he said. It's good to be able to preach to you guys as with dads in town. It's a huge honor. And just as a pastor, I want to say this to you guys: thank you so much for trusting us with your kids. That you would, trust us to walk alongside them, to shepherd them, to spiritually pour into them. We do not take that lightly at Resonate Church. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for staying a little longer and just having to endure the traffic later this afternoon. It means a lot that you would worship with us this morning. And also want to say, go Cougs. Hashtag bowl game. This is exciting. It's a good time. It's a good place to be a Coug. And so, several years ago, days away from graduating college, I walked through a lobby. I'm trying to study for a freshman level course that I waited to my senior year to take. And I walked through the lobby, and through the lobby walks Josh Martin, our worship pastor. And Josh is leaving IHOP. He just studied for this test. He's done. He's probably going to ace it because that's the kind of student that Josh was. I am not that type of student. And so I waited till midnight. So I walked through the lobby. Luckily, our paths crossed. I go, Josh, have you started studying? He's like, yeah, I just finished. I go, hey, would you be willing to study with me? And what I didn't tell him is that because I didn't have any notes, I didn't read the book, I needed to just mooch off of what he knew. And so luckily, he went to IHOP with me. It's like 3 a.m. We're drinking coffee, haven't even started studying, talking about life and what in the world we're going to do with our life after college. And we're like, I don't really want to go to grad school. Me neither. I'm not ready for that. Well, what should we do? And he's like, I want to do music. I was like, I want to perform. And so let's just get in a car and just start driving around America, and we'll just see what happens. And we thought, this would be fun. It's a cute little hobby to last a month or two. We had no idea that we'd spend a year and a half just driving around America performing in just different places, different churches, different venues, just, sleeping on people's couches. This was like back before couch surfing was cool and a thing. And this was back before Airbnb. And so we kind of feel like we invented that, kind of set that into motion. But we also got a national park pass because we just all over America, we'd find ourselves with a few days that we just swing through the park. And if you pay for a park pass, it's just a little bit more than a 1-day pass. So if you go twice, pay for it. And so we go to Yellowstone, went to Yosemite. But I remember specifically there was this time that we find ourselves in Arizona going to the Grand Canyon. We'd both been, I think, as kids, but not really as adults, kind of looking at this and be able to take it all in. And so we come up to that edge of that Grand Canyon and look at this amazing sight. And I remember in that moment thinking back and going, man, I wonder the first people that ever came up to the Grand Canyon, what were their thoughts? What did they, what was going through their mind when they just kind of ran up to the Grand Canyon? And I was like, man, they could have chosen to complain or kind of grumble and be like, man, this is a giant crack in the earth. This is horrible. Or they could have taken it in like we did and just saw it for all of its beauty and just how small you feel in that moment. Well, the sun is slowly starting to set, and so we decide, hey, we're just going to stay in Grand Canyon, the national park, and so we get a spot. And luckily, Josh had some reason put a tent in the back of our car that we had never opened to this point. And so what takes probably normal men 5 minutes by themselves to assemble a tent, it took us about an hour and a half just working this little tent. And all of a sudden it's getting dark and we don't really notice it with our headlamps. And when it's done, we finish the tent. Josh has been quiet for a little bit. And I noticed, man, he's just looking up at the sky, just in awe. You can hear just this sigh, this, wow. And in that moment, Josh and I look up, and it was like we'd seen in the sky and the stars for the very first time. And you know those nights that I'm talking about where you can just, they look like headlights in the sky. You can see the Milky Way. It just looks like you could reach up and just touch the sky and touch and grab the stars. And we're excited. We're amped up. It's not like we're just sitting there just somber. We're geeking out about this moment, about these stars. They're just so bright. And so we live in a world and in a culture where there's there's the light pollution, the light from our phones, and we're just geeking out about this moment. Because there's a lot of times, when you're hanging out with people and someone will look up at the sky and they'll be like, there's the Big Dipper. And you're like, kinda. I mean, I kind of see it, But this was not that moment. For us, it was like looking into the sky and going, that's a giant spoon in the sky. And that is most definitely a guy with a bow and arrow. Like you can see it up there. And there's that moment where you just feel connected to our ancestors. We just felt like we had this bonding moment. Knowing like this is what they saw every night. Like these luminaries in the sky, that this paved the way for them. This is how, in a place where they didn't have lights, this is what allowed them to see in the dark. This is what men would, how they would navigate through deserts or through the oceans. They would have that fixed point that would lead them home, these stars. And so why do I tell you that? Well, one, it's just a ridiculous story about Josh and I wish it was before like Instagram and Twitter, and so before selfie sticks, so we don't have any of this documented, like Facebook was just becoming cool. But I tell you this story because of this, is because the scripture that Chris just read and we're going to look at this morning tells us that as followers of Jesus, as a church, like if we've confessed that Jesus is who he says he is, that we follow after him as one body, as one family, that we're called to be like the stars in the sky, to shine bright in a dark culture. That's what we're called to be called to be light in a dark world. That Matthew 5, Jesus tells us this, that we are like a city that's on a hill, that we're like this lamppost, and that no one takes a lamp and puts a bowl over it. No, it's meant to shine, to bring light. And we shine in such a way that it actually points to God and makes much of him. That this is, as a church, that we're called to be in a lot of ways this lighthouse, these stars that just kind of guide people home, that illuminate the darkness and they give people a place to fix their eyes on. And so we're going to look in the text this morning. I just want to read this over you again in Philippians chapter 2. If you have your Bibles, you can join me there. If not, we'll have it on the screen or you can look it on your phone. But in verse 12, this is what it says. Therefore, my dear friends, so Paul is saying in light of everything that we just talked about, in light of who Jesus is, the fact that he humbled himself, came to earth, died on a cross for us, he says, therefore, in light of that, my dear friends, as you've always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you and to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. I wish I had more time to be able to really unpack what this verse means. In a lot of cultures or a lot of churches, this causes a little bit of confusion, especially this part about like working out your salvation. Like, what does that mean? What did Paul mean by that? Is he saying that we're called to actually work for our salvation and that we have to do enough good deeds to earn God's love for us and to earn salvation? No, not at all. Salvation is a free gift. If the gospel's not free, it's not the gospel. That what Paul here is telling us, and I said, I wish I had way more time to unpack this, is that God is working for you, that he's worked that, he's put the gospel inside you, the salvation, he's worked that for you, and that he's working in you. And that we get a chance to participate in that. It's a lot like a farmer that would take a seed. He didn't produce the seed, didn't create the seed, didn't build the seed, but a farmer takes the seed, plants it into the ground. And then the rain comes, the sun comes, and all of a sudden now there's a tree. And no farmer would look at a tree and be like, look what I built that tree there. Like they don't do that. They don't build trees. That a farmer only cultivates the ground. That maybe can help out water in a drought season, but ultimately only God builds the tree. And so for us, that's what that means. He's saying that we work out our salvation. Both our desire changes and our action changes because of our connection with the Lord. Then he says this is what I want to highlight. He says, do everything without grumbling and arguing so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky. That what Paul just said is this, that you and I, as followers of Jesus, that we're called to shine like stars in the sky, to be luminaries for the world to see in a broken, twisted, dark generation and culture, that we shine different, we look different, that we shine out as luminaries. And he's gonna say, like, how do we do this? Like, how does that work out? Like, how do we shine? Like, how do we present ourselves in such a way that the world sees things different? Like, this is what he says right here. Did you catch it in verse 14? Here's what he says. Do everything without grumbling or arguing. That's it. That's what he says. Like, if you want to shine like stars in the sky, luminaries in a dark culture, don't be a crybaby. That's what he says. Don't argue and complain. And it's real easy because we like hear that and we're like, Paul, you got to be kidding, right? Like, that can't be it. Like, there's got to be more. Like, if we're going to shine like stars, it would have made so much more sense if he would have been like, we're going to shine like stars in the sky. Like, give all your money to the poor. Like, just give it away. Or burn at the stake. Like, that makes more sense, right? You go, oh, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Give up your life, die for the cause of Christ. But Paul's going to say, if you want to shine like stars in the sky, don't grumble and complain. Don't be a crybaby. And it feels a little underwhelming, if we're honest. And we go like, really? That's what you mean, Paul? And it feels underwhelming until you actually look at our culture. When you actually look at our speech and the way that we talk to each other and the way we talk about things. In a Huffington Post article, I saw this, that the statistics say that 30 to 40% of all of our speech is negative and complaining. 40% of the things that come out of your mouth are negative and complaining. Like, just think about that. Try it this week. Try to go a whole week or even a whole day or maybe an hour. Try an hour. I'll give you an hour. Try not to complain. Try not to be negative. You won't even know what to say. Like, you just, like, that's it. Like, you won't have anything to say. Like, I saw in a New York Times that said this, that 95% of consumers, people that buy products, they will have a complaint about a product, will not tell the seller, the product, the people that made the product, the manufacturers, won't tell them if they don't like the product. 95%. But they will tell 10 or 15 of their friends how much they hate that product and how dissatisfied they are. So instead of telling the people that can actually do something about this, they just like go up to their 10 or 15 friends and go, let me just make your day a little bit worse. You can do absolutely nothing about this, but I'm going to complain to you. I mean, we just naturally complain. We're naturally just so dissatisfied. We look at the things that we have and we just just grumble and complain. Like 40% of our speech. And you could go look and go, Drew, like, listen, what's the big deal? Like, this can't be that big of a deal, right? Like, everyone does this. Like, we all complain. You just made that point. What's the big deal? Everyone does it. And listen, if you find yourself sitting here this morning and that's where your heart naturally goes, like it naturally rests and goes, it's not a big deal. Everyone does it. Exactly. That's the point. Everyone does it. You're not different. In a world where our speech should be that of life-giving encouragement, that we don't grumble, we don't complain. Because here's the deal, grumbling isn't just like net zero. It's not just like that when you're hanging out with someone and you get like 10 to 12 sentences to like speak to them. It's not like that grumbling just is like gets you nowhere. It's not like that it's a net zero. But it's actually like a negative. Like, it actually takes away from situations. I'm going to give you three points, 3 ways I think grumbling affects us. One, I think grumbling, it steals your joy, it steals my joy. That grumbling makes us like myopic, laser focused on a problem, not a blessing. Like, everything can be going great in a day, but you will zero in on that one thing that's not going right, and we will complain about that. So instead of being excited or been grateful for all these amazing things, we'll laser focus on the one thing that we don't like. And the more that we have, honestly, the more we complain. That I read somewhere that America complains, man, more than any third world country worldwide. That we have more stuff, but we complain more than anyone else. We just complain so much. Like, here's just a great example. If you're just like, okay, Drew, I don't know if I'm really buying this. We have a whole slew of memes and complaints that we just call first world problems, right? You know what I'm talking about? Just in case you don't know, dads, if you're not hanging with me, I brought a few memes for us. So let me show you a few of these. Here's the first one. This is something you would definitely hear on a college campus at Wazoo. My laptop is dying, but the charger's in another room. I can't be getting up and using my legs and stuff, and so I'll just sit here. Luckily my phone's got some juice. But this is, you've caught yourself to do this. Go to the next one. Man, ladies, or fellas too, the closet's full of clothes, but I got nothing to wear. Nothing to wear. How many times have you caught yourself saying that? Go to the next one. Oh, fellas. Forgot to post on social media. Now, this whole workout was a waste. If you don't post it, it didn't happen, right? Pixar didn't happen. I think we got one more. Is being tired of the first world problem meme just the first world problem? Yes, I think so. When we fix our eyes on what we don't have, when we complain, when we murmur, it tells us that we're dissatisfied, we're laser focused on what we don't have, and it steals our joy from the things that we do have. But not only that, not only does it steal our joy, that grumbling, that it actually poisons community. That it poisons community. I was on campus at U of I and got to meet, just sitting with a guy who went to Elevate with us this summer in San Diego. And we're just hanging out, and we're sitting in these two chairs, and right next to me, there's a guy who's just sipping on his Jamba Juice, ready to go to go to a test. And I look at him, and on his shirt, just on the pocket, it has just the word La Jolla, California. And so I look at him, and I was like, bro, where did you get that shirt? We spend the whole summer in La Jolla. He's like, man, I live in Southern California. My family goes vacation every year. So we just strike up this conversation. I'm like, how did you get up here? He's like, well, first I went to school in Texas. I'm like, I'm from Texas. Where'd you go to school? He's like, I went to TCU. I was like, my wife went to TCU. And then we ended up finding out that he knew my wife, which was just crazy. I was like, how did you get up here? And he goes, well, my sister works for a winery. And I moved up here and at school at U of I, finishing up my business degree because he wants to go into making and selling wine. And so we, this weekend on Friday at a coffee shop, my wife was actually singing with some other the Resonate band guys, and I invited him, and we're just hanging out and just kind of talking. And he's just telling me all these stories, and just kind of I don't know how we got ourselves in this conversation, but he's talking about the movie Sideways, which is just all about wine. And in his character, Paul Giamatti, that's in the movie, he's just very pessimistic, but he's just like an expert in wine. And there's a moment in the movie where he just tells another guy, he's like, I hate Merlot. Like, I hate it. Talking about just this one comment, how much he hates it. And so this is this expert that makes this offhanded comment about how much he hates this type of wine. And my friend Colin tells me this, that in the next 3 years, that Merlot sales plummet 75%. Why? Because in a fictitious movie, one character that's supposed to be an expert says he hates it. Therefore, our culture goes, well, I guess it sucks. Now listen, it's a small illustration, but the point is when you murmur and you complain, you actually poison and steal the joy of those around you. Like, how many times have you found yourself, and even in a class, and someone walks in, like you sit down and somebody's like, man, I hate this class. And you're like, yeah, me too. And you don't hate this class. You actually like it, but now you hate it because he said he hates it. Or they'll be like, man, I'm failing this class. And you're like, yeah, right. And you're like, no, you're doing well. You have an A in this class. But it steals, and now all of a sudden, like, it's affecting you. And how many times, listen, and just real talk, how many times Someone meets someone and they walk and you leave that interaction. You're talking to your friend, you're like, man, I love this person. And it seems so cool. And they're like, yeah, I'm not a big fan. And you're like, oh, well, I guess there's something wrong with them. And all of a sudden, the value in their mind, because this person chooses, to murmur, to complain, to talk negatively about this person, and it changes the view and it causes disunity. That it poisons community. This is a big deal. It hurts people. It steals joy from others. And it leads to disputing. And it causes us not to shine. We look just like everybody else. That stab each other in the back. We gossip. We talk about people when they're not around. And it's just murmuring and complaining. Now, not only does this steal our joy, not only does it poison community, that grumbling is actually a sin. Grumbling actually dishonors God. John Piper, a pastor, said this. He said, grumbling is an evidence of little faith in the gracious providence of God in all the affairs of our lives. And little faith is a dishonor to him. It belittles his sovereignty and wisdom and goodness. That when we grumble, that ultimately we are looking at God and saying, you know what? The gifts that you've given me, the things that you've put in my life, you messed up. You don't know what you're doing. I know best. I've got this figured out, God. I've got a plan, and if you'll do it my way, this will work out better. It's a total spit in the face of God. That grumbling and complaining are not ultimately the heart's response to a circumstance, to a situation, but to God. That our grumbling has very little to do with our scenery. It has everything to do with our heart and our posture towards God. For example, if you use the illustration, and I know it's classic, maybe it's a little overused, but the glass half empty, glass half full illustration. If I have a glass here, when someone looks at it and says it's half empty, by nature, that is a heart that is complaining and murmuring. That it looks at this glass and ultimately it feels entitled and it's arrogant. And it looks and says, you know what? I deserve a full glass of water. It's half empty and I'm not pleased with this. Somebody owes me another half glass of water. And I'm not content with that. I'm going to cross my arms and I'm going to just look away and I'm not drinking that glass of water until I get a full glass of water. And somebody in the community wants to reach out and grab that water and go, no, if I can't enjoy it, you're not going to enjoy it. So not only is it steal the joy from me, I steal the joy from you. No, not drinking it till it's full. That when that glass is half full, a heart of gratitude that looks and goes, you know what? I deserve absolutely no water. I deserve an empty glass. But God, because you are gracious, because you are merciful, because you are loving, that you've entrusted me with 4 ounces instead of 8 ounces of water. And I will drink it, and I will be so thankful. I deserve nothing, God. But that you be willing to give me that, I'll take it. And I'll be thankful for it. I'll be grateful for it. That when a heart realizes that it absolutely deserves nothing, that you and I, as followers of Jesus, we've seen Christ. We've seen what he's done on that cross. And we realize that what we deserve because of our sin, because of our, just brokenness, we deserve eternal separation from God. But that God came to earth, wrapped himself in human flesh to rescue us, to redeem us, to die on a cross that you and I deserve. And our heart has just an ability to be overwhelmingly grateful. To go, man, God, I don't even deserve this, but thank you so much. And I will drink it gladly. The gratitude comes from realizing that we have been given a gift that we do not deserve. Our culture, we just love to just hate on things. Haters gonna hate, right? Sing it, Taylor. That's the culture's mantra. But the Christian says, no, we don't hate. That's not our language. That's not what we speak. And it's important because, listen, it's not only just the things that we say, it's also really important that our motivation of our hearts aren't grumbling. I think it's easy for us to go, okay, sweet, Drew, I think I'm wrapping my mind around this. What my job today is to walk out of here and pull off like that Bambi movie thing where it's like, hey, if you can't say anything nice, like don't say anything at all. And you're just kind of like, close it up. But the truth is, listen, God is actually after the motivation of our hearts, because sometimes we can say nothing, but our hearts are grumbling. Our hearts complain, our hearts murmur. And God's actually after our motivation too. That's the language that Paul says here. And let me kind of paint it this way. If I go home this afternoon, like if we didn't have church tonight, and I was like, man, I'm going to surprise my wife, and I'm going to take her on a date. And so I get reservations to the nicest restaurant in Pullman. I can do that because you dads are leaving in just a few hours, okay? And so I get the nicest reservation I can find. I go home, I surprise her. I've got flowers, and I just we're going on a date, and we sit down, it's romantic, there's candles, and so do this thing, like I'm just over there on my phone the whole time. Just checking BuzzFeed, checking Twitter, liking some photos on Instagram, and Jane just confused and just looks at me and goes, Drew, I don't understand. Why did you do all of this? And I go, well, babe, because I have to. That's what husbands do, right? I'm just going to go ahead and tell you guys that aren't married, that's not going to go well for me, okay? And why? Because the motivation of my heart is important as well. And this word murmuring, the language he's using is actually referring back to the Exodus. He's actually going back to the Israelites where they would murmur, and so much. Like they're in slavery. The most powerful man in all of planet Earth, Pharaoh, is like got them enslaved, and Moses shows up and says, let my people go. And not only does he kind of humble Pharaoh, he breaks the spirit of Pharaoh. And these Israelites leave Egypt, and they're headed to the promised land. They watch the Red Sea, it parts. They walk across a dry land. They're walking through the desert. God is providing for them every day food, and they just find themselves murmuring. They're like, no water, Moses. Where's the beef, Moses? I got blisters on my feet, Moses. Who put you in charge? Made you boss, Moses? Are we there yet, Moses? They just grumble, they complain. They're just so just big crybabies. And the reason is I think there's two causes, two symptoms. One, I think it's because they have spiritual amnesia. The reason that we grumble and complain is because we forget. We forget that God is providing for us, that he is taking care of us day by day, that he has provided for us a way of salvation, that he's redeeming us, that he walks alongside us, that he's provided us with community, that we have health, that we have the ability to have a college education. For some of us, that we have jobs. God has provided so much, but we forget, and we complain, and we murmur. And for the Egyptians, what should have taken them 11 days to go from Egypt to the promised land, because of their murmuring and complaining, it would end up taking them 40 years, wandering through the desert. And God would wait for those that would complain to die off before he'd take his people into the promised land. Oh, church, may that not be our story. But we have a tendency so much to be like them. Not only is it spiritual amnesia, but it's a lack of gratitude. That we can look to God and we just go, man, I know you're forgiven. You've forgiven all my sins. You've rescued me from eternal damnation, and that you love me so much. But for dinner, we're having ramen noodles. Are you serious? Bagel bites again? We're just so ungrateful. And that God provided for the Israelites 40 years, no gluten allergies, no low-carb diet, no soy problems, no dairy problems. He just completely provides for his people every day. And they just grumbled and complained. So God, I know best. You don't know what you're doing. And church, if we want to shine like stars in the sky, we have to do everything without complaining. Everything. But how do we do this? Let's get real this morning. How do we do this? I think it'd be easy this morning to kind of give you a list of maybe some things to try this week. Let's maybe write out like, hey man, every day this week, if you could write out 5 things that you're thankful for. I mean, that's actually a cool thing, actually. Like the scientists say that by you writing out and being grateful for 5 things actually rewires your brain, and so that gratitude is a natural thing that comes out of your mouth versus grumbling and complaining. Or I could tell you, hey, look, it's like try to like just keep your mouth shut when you get frustrated, or that roommate does something that really annoys you, or just try to think positive thoughts. I could give you pointers. And I may be able to go, okay, hey, let me talk more about the negative effects of this. That it actually, that grumbling and complaining leads to depression. That grumbling and complaining actually leads to lower productivity in school and in your job. That it actually makes people not want to hang out with you. But I don't know if any of those things would help you this morning. Because the truth is that ultimately, that grumbling and complaining, it's a heart issue. That Luke's going to tell us, just quoting the words of Jesus in Luke chapter 6, he says this, that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so we don't need this morning new tactics. We don't need new things to think about or new disciplines. What we need is a new heart. And so I want to give us just 3 really practical things of how that we can not really change our behavior, but change our heart. And the very first thing is this, and is what we see here in the text, is that we fix our eyes on Jesus. That if we want to stop grumbling and complaining, if we want to shine like stars in the sky, we have to fix our eyes on Jesus. Hebrews 12 tells us this, that we fix our eyes on the author and the perfecter of our faith, that we focus in on him. That later on in this scripture, in verse 16, that right after that passage that we just read, that he says this, that we hold fast to the word of life. We hold fast to it. We grab it. What he's saying here is this, is that we fix our eyes on the words of Jesus, that what he said to us, the breath of life, that we focus in on that. And if you think about this, just the word itself, like who is the word? John 1 tells us that the word became flesh and it moved into our neighborhood. It's Jesus, that we hold fast to Jesus. We fix our eyes on him. In verse 21, when Paul is talking about Timothy, he says this, what sets him apart, what makes him so much different, is that he's fixed his eyes on Jesus. He's focused on Jesus. And we see him. To see Jesus is to love him. Then we fix our eyes on Jesus. It cultivates a heart of gratitude. So not only fix our eyes on Jesus, this allows us to remember. We remember. So we establish in our memory, we memorize, we paint it on the walls of our house, we journal it, we reread it. Now some of you, this is just as practical as I can make it. Some of you ladies, every morning when you wake up, you find yourself in front of that mirror. And every morning your default is just in your heart to begin to complain and nitpick about the way you look, the features about you that you wish were different, just how unsatisfied you are. And unintentionally, we're looking at God and going, God, what you make is not perfect. You messed up on me. You don't know what you're doing. If I was in control, I would do it this way. And it steals your joy. But to remember, maybe even for some of you to take out a marker and write on your mirror that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, that God doesn't make mistakes. To remember what he's done in your life. To journal out those things. What is God doing? To remember. And the truth is, because we just easily forget. If we're inclined to grumble, to be thankless, or complain about our circumstance, that God graciously may remind us that we must remember his gracious redemption and provision. And the last part, not only do we fix our eyes on Jesus, that allows us to remember, but we also choose to speak life. That our words, every word that we have, and the few sentences that we're given in every interaction with, maybe it's our parents here this weekend, or maybe it's our friends, our few sentences that we're given, they either speak life or they take life. Very few things are neutral. In Deuteronomy 30, there's a scripture that says this, that right before you, there's a path of life and there's a path of death, and God begs his people to choose life. Please choose life. That our words have the ability to speak life into someone or to speak death into someone. May the culture, may the language of our church be that of speaking speaking life, not death. That's a big mess up. Don't write that in your notes. I just talking to Chris this weekend and asking ourselves, like, how did Jesus change culture? Like, how did he flip the world upside down? How did he shine like a star in the sky? Like, when he walked on planet Earth, like, this brother shined. Like, people were drawn to him. And you know the why? Because he spoke life. Like, Jesus spoke life into a dead, shriveled hand, and it comes to life. That Jesus speaks the words of life into dead eyes, and all of a sudden they have focus, and now they open and they can see. That he speaks life into dead skin and it's healed. He speaks life into a dead heart, and people go from death to life spiritually. He speaks life into a tomb, and a man named Lazarus steps out of the tomb dead and now alive. That the accent of heaven is speaking life. The accent of hell will be filled with people murmuring. This is how we live together as a church. Church, if you want to shine in your fraternity, in your sorority, try this week. Speak life. Choose to speak life into your brothers or your sisters. If you want to shine on the football team or your athletic team at WSU, speak life. You will shine like a star in the sky. You want to change the culture, shine bright in your dorm or with your roommates? Speak life. Don't murmur and complain. Don't be like everyone else. Choose to speak life. It's the language of heaven. It's the language of our church. Just this past, I guess like 2 weeks ago, and the band can kind of come up. I'm just going to finish with the story. I had an opportunity to get to celebrate my brother's 30th birthday. And Kyle is on the worship team here, and he's just an easy guy to celebrate. Like, he gives the best gifts ever. Like, my wife, he found out that she loves coloring books, and so he bought her all these coloring books for her birthday, and then ordered one that hasn't come out that'll be here in a couple of months. Like, he's just a good guy, easy to celebrate. And I find myself, just a guy who just naturally breathes life. Like, he's discipled more men in our church than I think anyone else in our church. That most of the men that are up here on this stage is because he's poured his life into them. He's trained up so many of our worship leaders. And we're getting away for the weekend, and we're on this plane, and I'm just literally murmuring and complaining about something. I'm just so frustrated. I'm like, oh, my job, I hate this part, I hate this part, I hate this part. And Kyle just looks at me and is like, are you kidding? You have nothing to complain about. This is a real conversation. And then in my heart, I'm so frustrated at him for not complaining with me and being like, yeah, Drew, you're so right. You need to let them have it. Tell them what you really think. I'm just mad. And he just goes, Drew, that's just not our language. And Kyle is a man in our church that speaks life and life and life. And there are so many people, so many of you in this room that you're better for it. And I don't know if I'll see this. I'm not promised tomorrow, but I do know that one day, if Jesus doesn't come back before, that if he lives till we get to watch his heart stop beating, there will be a day where at his funeral there will be, a line around the corner with men that will just have words to say how his life touched them, that he spoke into their world, that he had a chance to speak death, but he chose to breathe life, that there wasn't murmuring or complaining out of his voice, that he's a guy that gets up at 4 a.m. on Sunday mornings to help set all of this up, and he won't go to bed till 10 o'clock tonight. Just because it's just church, just serves. Church, I want us to be those type of people. There shouldn't be just one bright, shining star in the sky. But may we be a church that just fills the night sky, that fills our dark culture with the bright light of Jesus. May our language speak life. That's my prayer for you guys. My prayer for myself, and it's hard, but I want to push together. I want to go that direction. So let me pray, and we'll be done. Father, we love you. I'm thankful for you. And God, I ask that that the language that we speak as a church would be that of gratitude. Would you remind us of everything that you've done for us? God, we're so thankful for your cross and for the life that you offer. It's in your name we pray all these things, Jesus. Amen.